Thanks for tuning into the Kelly Hill Ross Show, and I'm Kelly Hill Ross. You know, there will be times in your life when you will feel sad because of the loss of a friend, a relative, or a loved one. That anguish is called grief. Because of my own personal loss, I wanted to know, how do you manage or handle grief? And for that answer, I went to Adrienne Better, who is a mental health and grief counselor. I met her during my encounter with personal grief. Also in today's show is Adrienne Better from eXp Realty, an interior design and staging company. She's going to show us a property in Baltimore City. So get your cup of coffee, your tea, or favorite beverage, and enjoy the show. Okay, well, Adrienne, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. It is certainly a pleasure.
Kelly, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, and I'm so happy that we had an opportunity to meet some time ago with grief counseling and mental health, even though it was about grief with me, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to meet so we could have this conversation. So tell me a little bit about your practice. What is the name of your practice?
My practice is called Changes for the Better. Yes, it's a mental health practice.
Okay. And now that the last time we spoke, there was no COVID, there was no virus. And now with COVID-19, have you seen a rise in the need for grief counseling and mental health?
Absolutely. Not only me, but my colleagues as well. We have had calls on a daily basis. People have had been affected greatly because of the pandemic and COVID-19.
Well, tell me this, when we talk about grief, are there different types of grief or different stages of grief?
Absolutely. Well, definitely there are different stages to grief, with grief in general. Uh, when people lose a loved one, they, of course, experience the loss. And it just depends if the loss is something that's been expected, if there have been a long-term illness, and they can have something that's called anticipatory grief, watching the loved one suffer through an illness can be pretty devastating. And then, of course, when their loved one actually passes or transition, you know, they'll go through the actual loss and the stages thereof. But then, of course, there's different types of losses in life in general. And those too can have stages of grief to that. People can go through, when it comes to grief, they can grieve certain losses of, such as a divorce, loss of jobs, different types of losses in that aspect. But also too, with the pandemic, since you mentioned the pandemic, that too has a grief component all of its own. Absolutely.
Okay, so how should one cope with grief? Some people, people are passing away every day, and I've always said you don't really feel it until it comes to your door, because I've had friends to pass, and distant friends, associates, and their parents or whatever have passed, but it doesn't seem like it's the same until it actually comes to your door. What should one do?
Sure, absolutely. So the one thing that one should completely understand is that when it comes to a loss of a loved one, grief looks different to different people. They handle it differently. And so a lot of times when you experience loss and someone else has lost someone, people tend to compare and feel as though I should be grieving like that person grieves, but that's not accurate. People handle their losses differently. And so one thing is clear is that you should be gentle with yourself and allow yourself to come to terms with what just happened. And so allow yourself not to compare yourself to others. Give yourself time to adjust to what has happened. And so allow yourself not to judge yourself would be the first thing I would say that you should do for yourself.
That's interesting. Okay. So with COVID, there's been a big increase. What types of issues are you seeing?
So with COVID, a lot of people talking, as we're talking about adjustment. With COVID, the biggest thing is adjustment. What is happening? People are seeing things on the news. We're getting misinformation. We're getting way too much information. We're getting changes in community, changes on our jobs. We're getting inundated with, we were getting inundated with a lot of information. And we didn't know which way to turn. And then we were being affected by the virus in and of itself. And then what happened last year, things shutting down, being isolated, things were running out in the stores. Our jobs were being affected. The schools were being affected. Everything being shut down. We're teaching children at home. We're working from home. And so our whole lifestyle changed. Things were being running out. And so panic took place, anxiety, isolation. And so of course that affected our emotional stability. Job security, financial security. And so people didn't know how to handle those things. And so that's when, my office, along with other mental health facilities, were getting a lot of calls as to how do we handle our anxiety. Yeah.
And so I know some people have a tendency to ignore grief. They can get through it. They just, which is good, I guess. If you don't need any assistance, you just go through the hurt, the pain, or the anxiety. But when is it when you know that you should seek help? When it is you still have the long-term anxiety, or does grief, does it have a time period, maybe for a couple months or a year, and then after that you should be finished grieving?
So with grief, when it comes to just typical normal grief, you should allow yourself to grieve as long as you need. This is where you evaluate if it's the death of a loved one. You should allow yourself to evaluate the relationship you had with that person, and be honest with it. If you're working with a grief counselor, you have to evaluate the good and the bad that you had with that person. If it's grief of a way of life, such as with the pandemic, then you have to once again work out that grief with a professional as to the change and the transition of what has taken place, or if a job has been lost, or if resources have run out. What does that mean? If you lost a loved one to COVID, that's a big one. I have had to work with people who have lost loved ones to COVID, family members who have, couldn't talk to loved ones who contracted COVID, and because hospitals were shut down or they had restrictions, and loved ones had to die separately. It's just been pretty devastating. Funeral homes, you could not have funeral services to say goodbye. It's the way lifestyles had changed, and so people had to change the way they would do rituals of saying goodbye to loved ones, or postpone memorial services, or just do things differently. And so finding a new way of meaning has had to be constructed in treatment services of knowing what's in the heart.
Mm-hmm.
That has had to be brought to life in mental health services when you're working with loved ones. Yes.
So you talked a little bit about there can be different stages of grief, and I guess individuals, every person may handle it, differently. So in your practice, you coach them, you give them tips on what to do, or you have sessions with them and talk about. Tell me exactly, what do you do when you're helping someone with grief, or we'll talk about mental illness as well.
Sure. Yes. One of the things mantras that I've worked with, and it's going to be familiar, but it still holds true, Kelly, even during this pandemic, if not more so today than ever before.
Okay.
Yes.
So Adrienne, tell me, what are some of the recommendations that you give to people when, they come to you for help?
Yes. So one of the mantras that I've used through the years, and it holds true, especially during this pandemic, has been something that has been used in the platform for people struggling with addiction and working their way through recovery, is the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so with this is that, you have to accept the things you cannot change. And so work with what you can, what you can do and what you cannot do. And so this is where you work within your parameters. You do what you can. You accept what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. You learn to relax. You learn to look into the beauty of things. You learn to take the break. I find it fascinating that during this pandemic, there are some people that can find strength in some things, or they actually needed the break. They actually can look in their own home for some resources, or spend some quality time. Learn some safety measures. Learn to value family. There are just some things that you can do, as opposed to moving. Before the pandemic, we were moving out of touch at home, and so they're spending some time with children, realizing that spending that quality time and doing homework with kids. And so there are some things in the pandemic that you can look and find some beauty in it. So learning learning to look deeper in, there's some things that we were out of touch that we could be in touch with.
And
Sure.
I think the world kind of slowed down a lot, and we all began to smell the roses, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We took, I just can say for me, it was even the birds, being able to recognize, the birds and what they do and their patterns. And oh, look at the beautiful bird. Never paid attention to it. I have an outdoor fish pond, and I'd always go out, throw the fish food out, and that was it. But I had time to recognize that the birds needed food, and the fish, they did their thing, and I never paid attention to it. So I think that is that helped us a lot. And
Absolutely.
right. And I think what you do with grief and mental illness, would you say that they both are side by side, or would you put them into two different categories? Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. So yes, sure. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, people were afraid of what was to come. And I'm not talking about people who lost loved ones because of COVID. That was something totally different. That was quintessential grief. But people, when things started to change and shut down, and people were afraid of the unknown. And so absolutely, that was something totally different. They weren't sure if they were going to be able to do something different. And then people learned that, hey, something actually pretty different came out. I learned to save money. I learned how to slow down a little bit. And so, sure. So people learned their anxiety. They learned that they were nervous over something that they didn't understand, that maybe they were meant to slow down a little bit. Sure. So yeah, I had a lot of clients that were nervous because of that. I don't know if I want to be home and do work from home and watch my child too. So sure. And then they got through with it, and they learned a different strength. They learned to save money on gas.
Yeah, and then it was the big question: should I take the vaccine? Should I trust the people? Then it was Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett. She was Black, and they were trying to persuade the Black community, that they should take it because a Black person was involved. And then there was the other side that said, well, this vaccine was created too soon, and it was going to, I guess we were going to grow extra ears, and all kinds of weird things were going on. And I guess people trying to, well, the whole society just trying to cope with that as well, because
Yes, yeah.
and then with the at the time, the administration that was in office then gave us so many false hopes and things that seemed to be, maybe that wasn't quite true, and we weren't sure whether to believe them or not. So yeah, it's mental health, grief. I commend you for being in that profession. So now let's flip this script a little bit and tell me a little bit about you and how you got into this profession.
Yes. So I got into this profession actually based off of the last thing you just said. I grew up in Baltimore City, and and I watched how our community struggled a lot with almost everything, but everything kind of centered around trauma, grief, mental health issues. Um, Whether it was children that struggle with ADHD and not knowing what to do with it, not trusting medication, their parents not trusting medication. I became a social worker because I wanted to do more community work. I wanted to help our community grow in various ways to be empowered. I watched a system that was built to help them try to destroy them. And so I wanted to be the educator. Um, um, Even in mentioning, if you don't mind me saying so, during this whole pandemic and doing the grief and trauma work, which is what my practice is dedicated to, I have had the misfortune of, I've been trying to do the educating in the community of people getting the vaccine. And I've watched people, and I never forced the issue because I understand the history of it, but I've also have had the misfortune of watching a lot of our community get contract COVID, and literally all the way up until last week have watched people. I've gone to funerals of people who've had COVID. Our community of people who did not get the shot and have died from it. And it's just been devastating. It's just devastating of watching our community be the last one on the totem pole because they don't trust the government. And you can see why, but at the same time, we suffer the consequences.
Yes.
And I like to stay in the community. I still like to be the voice. I still like to be that person that I want to help them build that trust, but at the same time, I want to help them so even going to these funerals, I'm still a support to their family members, and I try to encourage other mental health practitioners. But my practice is full. Other practitioners of their practice is full as well. I just came from someone's funeral, and once again, of that person contracting COVID, and their family wants mental health services now, but after losing a loved one, and the resources, it's just because of the pandemic. Thank goodness that there are more shots available now, but still the practitioners are, we're just scarce because of the pandemic. There's a wait list now.
Yeah. And I have interacted with people who said they weren't going to get the vaccine, and just some reasons to me that just seem unrealistic when you're talking about this is a virus that will kill. Yeah. This is not a virus that will either maim you and you can still live, or like they, with polio back years ago.
Yeah,
Those kids that got polio, they couldn't walk anymore. This is something that's going to take your life.
exactly, exactly, exactly. And it's our people. I have family. I have to admit, I have family members of my own that are like, I'm still waiting. I don't know if I want the shot, and I'm like, oh my goodness. But it's our people. When you hear of those who are still dying, yeah, now that even in the state of Maryland, they're lifting the restrictions now. But when you hear of those few numbers of people who are still dying, it's African Americans.
Yeah.
Who are there's still some Caucasians, but African Americans are still dying of COVID. And I'm hoping your show would get that message out that we still need to get the shot, because we're in that number. Baltimore City is
Yeah.
still in that number of people who are dying because of COVID, because they're afraid to get the shot.
Yeah, Dr. Grady Dale was on our earlier show, and this was just before the COVID shot became readily available, and before you could get it at a pharmacy. And he also said, get the shot, you know, and I got both of my shots, and I felt much better, because before I felt like I was a prisoner in my own house
Yes.
because I was afraid. And, and then I had a family member who was in contact with somebody who had COVID and they didn't know it. So then that meant we all had to run around and get a COVID test. So, yeah, the whole world, it just seems as though things have just been turned upside down, you know.
Yeah.
So, what would you like to say to those who are watching who may have some grief issues or mental health issues, or need to get some counseling? What would you like to say to them?
I would like to tell them that it's never too late to please reach out for help. You can reach out to the health department. That there's plenty of resources there. They have numbers there. You can still call my office if you need. The number is 410-900-9110. I have resources as well. But please don't hesitate, because carrying one of the things our community also loves to do is we feel like no one would understand and we could carry these problems on our own. But depression is real. And the thing of it is that we don't have to carry it ourselves. We really don't. This is 2021. And we don't have to do what our parents have done or their parents have done. There's help. There's help out there for us. And this is one of the messages we can teach our children, is that we don't have to walk around with sadness or depression or anger. That's another thing that our culture, we seem to be familiar with and be okay with, but we don't have to. We really can live a good and prosperous and happy lifestyle if we want it. And so it's just there for us, and we can be there for one another.
Okay.
So today we're here at 9748 Haven Lane. Mid-Atlantic Interior Design and Staging had did what we call a home preparation job here. So let me take you in and show you what they do before the house actually hit the market. So we're going to start here at the front door. First, they had to clean up the front to give it some curb appeal. So we had to paint the front door, put on new locks, give it a fresh look. So when you walk in, that's the first thing you see. We did here what they call a partial stage job. This isn't a full stage job, but we wanted to give it a look because the homeowner who was selling the property, they actually couldn't afford staging, so we figured we'd give them a little partial staging just so we can get the house sold in a quick manner. We actually sold the house in one day. We put the house on the market within 5 hours. We had 12 showings and 4 contracts on the property, which created a bidding war. The house started off at $299 and we wound up selling it for $325. It is definitely a seller's market. What we had to do in the kitchen, first thing we did was we had to declutter the kitchen, get everything out, and then come back in and have the cleaners give a thorough cleaning. Once they cleaned, we came in, we changed out all the knobs, and we cleaned the cabinets. We wind up painting the space to give it a fresh look. And that's very important when you're thinking about putting your house on the market. You have to do a fresh coat of paint so that it pops to the homeowner. Remember, this is their new home. We went out on the deck.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the show. So until the next time, stay safe. And as my late uncle used to say, hold on to what you got until you can get what you want. We'll see you on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. See ya.